Beto O'Rourke, his name is still hard to say for me, is running for president. I don't know if you've heard. He raised $6.1 million in his first 24 hours. It was the number of donors was around 60% of, or half of what Bernie Sanders had, and he raised $5.9 billion. The average was $47 for Beto O'Rourke. But he's consistently polling in the top 5. You've got Bernie and Biden right now at the tippy top. Kamala Harris, Beto O'Rourke, and Elizabeth Warren seem to be rounding out the current top 5. That can obviously change, but Beto, he doesn't support Medicare for all. That's becoming very clear. He has some good policy ideas, but he's pretty much a centrist Democrat, but he's young and sweet. You know, people seem to like that. The Onion posted some article about how he's just replaying Obama's greatest hits. I think he's a little less convincing. But Beto O'Rourke has actually a pretty conservative record in Congress, and right now he's saying that he's against the death penalty, but that doesn't seem to mesh with at least one of his votes very recently. Beto O'Rourke, a former Texas congressman and Senate candidate seeking the Democratic presidential nomination, said last week that as president he would suspend capital punishment at the federal level. But as recently as May 2017, O'Rourke broke with the majority of his Democratic House colleagues to vote for a bill that expanded the federal list of statutory aggravating factors in death penalty determinations to include the murder or targeting of a law enforcement officer, firefighter, or other first responder. In effect, the bill, called the Thin Blue Line Act, proposed making it easier to execute a defendant if they attacked law enforcement. The legislation is one of a series of bills Republicans have introduced as a political indictment of the Black Lives Matter movement, which has sought to end unjustified police killings of black people. The measure passed the House with 48 Democratic votes. 4 Republicans voted against it. And the bill never passed the Senate, so it hasn't gone into law. It was a symbolic vote from the House, which is, at the time, it was made up of Freedom Caucusers and pretty far-right Republicans. Now the Democrats obviously have control of the House, and Beto is no longer a congressman there. So he recently made headlines for criticizing Netanyahu and saying that Israel has a really big racism problem in the Middle East, which was, I thought, a pretty brave thing for him to say. Someone who has been publicly sort of supportive of AIPAC in the past. Now he's not going to AIPAC. I was like, okay, you know, maybe he's more progressive in surprising areas. This is bizarre. Why are you publicly talking about the death penalty when, one, actually a majority of Americans support the death penalty? So I'm against it for the reasons that it's you often get the wrong person, and it's a very racist in terms of results. But why are you saying this publicly when you just voted for it? And you voted with a slim minority of Democrats in the House, so it was something that you clearly cared about. You broke with the party to vote for this, and now you're saying that you're running on being against the death penalty? It doesn't make much sense, but it makes a lot of sense when you look at Beto's record in its full context and in the context of his Democratic colleagues. Now, Beto is actually representing a very progressive part of Texas. El Paso, his district, or that's what he was representing, votes pretty progressively all the time. It's not just progressive relative to Texas, it's progressive relative to the entire country. He's more conservative than his former constituents, as you can see based on what Vox compiled. In O'Rourke's 3 terms in Congress, he was more conservative than 76% of Democrats in his first term, more conservative than 79% in his second, and more conservative than 77% in his third. So this underscores a point about him. Beto has been a kind of lightning rod for the left, because before a lot of people were doing it, he said, I'm not going to run on corporate PAC money. Now, it's being revealed that it doesn't matter to a lot of these candidates because they get a slim minority of their money from corporate PAC money. A lot of the Democratic candidates get money from bundlers and big money donors, executives that are just donating directly to their campaign or from other sources. So while I applaud Beto O'Rourke for taking that step, it doesn't mean that he's some stalwart of progressivism, as we're seeing from his voting record. And I also think that we need to look at these candidates from a variety of different angles. So it's not just what they're saying on the campaign trail, because it's wind, right? Words are wind. They could go into office and completely fold on what they said they were going to do. We saw this with Obama, who really had some progressive rhetoric, but as a leader, he folded really quickly. He had this instinct within him to always compromise with Republicans, bring people together. He wanted to be liked. He wanted this bipartisanship to work. He was not a fighter legislatively, and I see a lot of that with Beto O'Rourke. And Beto is, from a voting record standpoint, not as progressive as Obama. Just because he's an inspirational speaker doesn't mean that he would actually fight for things, one, or that he believes a lot of what he's saying, because not only was his voting record pretty conservative, but it seems like what he's saying on the campaign trail isn't even what he truly believes or what he voted on. Now, he could have voted on that bill because obviously those police officers were shot and killed in Texas, and that's where he's from. So that could have been what he was pushing back against. But if you are against the death penalty nationwide, you should be against it in all circumstances, not when you're just trying to score political points on the campaign trail, as opposed to when you were a congressman and you were trying to score political points there. So who is Beto O'Rourke? I think it's becoming pretty clear that he's a middle-of-the-line centrist Democrat who is just very enthusiastic and young, and he ran a great campaign against Ted Cruz, but we have a lot of choices for president. And I want a presidential candidate who is going to fight for the things that we believe in and not just change with the political tide. That's something that I think Joe Biden has historically done, and I see some of that in Beto O'Rourke, whose record is not close to as progressive as his rhetoric.